Anesthesiologists of Reddit. What was something you won't forget hearing from someone that was under? My husband was put under to get his wisdom teeth out. He was a little anxious and also is just kind of anal. He's an engineer. So he read his pre op instructions front to back like a dozen times. One of the things it said was, "You may experience profound disorientation upon awakening." As he woke up, he opened one eye and looked around the room, then said, extremely huffily, "I wouldn't call this profound." Then he started crying. I was giving a young female patient sedation for a routine colonoscopy, and as I pushed the propofol, the sleepy medicine, it started to hit her. She sat straight up and yelled to everyone in the procedure room, "I shaved my butthole for you!" And she flopped down on her pillow and she was asleep. I was coming out of the fog of anesthesia from a colonoscopy. Apparently, I didn't recognize my wife and refused her affections, telling her she was pretty, but I was married. Got big brownie points for that. Anesthesiologist here. For better or for worse, I'm a big Green Bay Packers fan, so I wear a scrub cap with the Packers name/colors on it. I was doing a pre-op evaluation on a kid who was a big New Orleans Saints fan, and when I first walked into the room, his first words to me were, "Packers suck." I laughed and continued to prepare him and his family for his redo open heart surgery procedure. Fast forward to surgery a couple days later, and his mom had come back to the OR as he was going to sleep. Given the fact that this was a 3 or 4 time redo sternotomy, going into the chest again, he had a higher risk of major complications from the surgery. I started to push some meds to have him go to sleep while his mom was holding his hand, and as he drifted off, he said, "Wait, I have to tell my mom something." She got emotional saying how much she loved him, and we were all watching to hear what he had to say so urgently. I paused giving him the medication, but he was already well on his way to being under, and as he drifted off to sleep, he said, "Packers suck." Kid did great. Hope he's doing well. My husband had his ACL and meniscus repaired. When they brought him back into the room, he stared at me through half-closed eyes until the nurses left and then said, "I love you. I'm glad you're here." I melted. Then he conked back out for about half an hour and woke up with a big gasp. I thought he was in pain, that's how loud it was, and went, "Burger King, burger." I said, "You want a Burger King burger?" He said, "I do." So I had to get him a Burger King burger for dinner. He doesn't remember anything until he was back home several hours later with Burger King sitting in front of him. Nurse here. I was 22 at the time. I had a teen boy come out of anesthesia who looked at me and said, "Hey, you're the girl from last night." I had to reassure everyone that that wasn't me. I had a surgery to remove bone spurs from my big toes in early February of 2005. I woke up while the doctor was grinding the bone down and asked if he thought Donovan McNabb could lead the Eagles to a Super Bowl win. He nodded at the anesthesiologist, and I don't remember anything after that. Anesthesiologist here. As I put someone out for a colonoscopy one time, the patient said, "You're cute. Are you gonna see my butt?" Then she was out. I gave a patient an IV dose of ketamine for a pain procedure. He proceeded to tell the room that everyone had turned into cartoon characters, and then he announced he was melting into a wall of butter. Still my finest achievement as a physician. My wife was all doped up during her C-section and asked the anesthesiologist, "Did they cut me open yet?" He calmly told her they did, to which she replied, "Aw, shiz," with a huge grin on her face. The doctor and I lost it. I'm sure the anesthesiologist that did my son's dental surgery will never forget him. Specifically because he came out after the fact, clearly trying very hard not to laugh to tell my wife about it. Kiddo was just chatting away while he was getting ready. Now, my son is autistic and at the same time had a very distinct way of speaking and pattern of emphasis along with a lisp. Imagine you had a soundboard of Butters from South Park that had all these words on it from vastly different conversations and strung them together into the sentences below, and you'll have a pretty decent idea of it. He sounds a bit different than my son, but it's about as close as I can get. Anyway, just as they're getting ready to put him under, he goes, "You're gonna need some hardcore nighttime medicine because I have ADHD." And out. Practically snoring even. They get to work, finish up, and pull the mask off him. The literal second the mask was off his nose, he bolts upright and finishes his sentence from however long earlier. That stuff don't work good on me. One of my patients coming out of sedation embarrassed her husband, who was in the room, by saying that during their lovemaking time, he likes to have Vicks rubbed on his backside. This one's kind of off topic, on topic, but when my mom woke up after having a stroke, the doctor asked if she recognized the people in the room. She got my sister's name right, called me my brother's name, and smiled real big at my stepdad and called him an a-hole. One guy said before falling asleep, "Whoa, this feels like a dime bag." I once asked the patient after surgery how he feels. He opens his eyes, stares me dead on, and says, "With my fingers." Then he goes right back to sleep. Apparently, when I was going under, I told the anesthesiologist, "Don't mess this up. I know where you work." My husband had knee surgery. After he woke up, he half yelled, half whispered, "Apple juice." So, the nurse gave him some apple juice, several small cups full. He grinned like a toddler and said, "Apple juice," and immediately flopped back and went back to sleep for all of 10 minutes, until he woke back up gasping that he couldn't breathe. His mom, who I had met maybe 1 or 2 times at this point, went up to the foot of his bed to grab a nurse in the doorway, and he bolted upright. That man projectile vomited pure apple juice directly into her face, body, the wall, the door to the hallway. I have never seen anything like it in my entire life. His mom stood there, soaked in juice vomit, and he just rubbed his eyes and said, "Ah, I feel better." Bam! Back to sleep for another 2 hours. A little girl was going under, and she was holding her mother's hand. She reached out for my hand with her other, and as she was going out, she joined mine with her mother's hand and said, "You would be a nice daddy." I probably went beetroot red as I blushed. I once woke up from going under singing the Magic School Bus theme song, while someone 3 beds away from me was screaming in agony. My husband woke up from anesthesia after a colonoscopy just after the doctor walked in. He didn't see the doctor and told me, "No BJ for you." Then fell back asleep and ripped a big fart. The doctor looked at me and busted out laughing. He said not to be embarrassed. People say the weirdest things, but this one, he'd remember. I was under anesthesia for a breast reduction, and as I was coming out, my nurse was talking to me, and apparently I started saying, "OMG, it's an angel, and she looks like Barbie." I kept yelling for Barbie Angel and possibly kept trying to hug her and pet her hair. I cried for her on the way home. She called to check on me later that night and referred to herself as Nurse Barbie Angel. She was the sweetest. My aunt, who notoriously despises fast food, she's an old Mexican lady whose food is as good as it gets, woke up and looked at my uncle and said, "Are you the sexy man that's gonna take me to McDonald's?" If you knew her, you would know that she would never say that. She has never lived it down. I was under general anesthesia to get my gallbladder removed. As I was being wheeled back through the double doors, there was a giant TV screen that listed the surgeries going on. I was way too loopy to actually read it, but I swear I saw elbowectomy and started hysterically laughing over the idea of removing an elbow and being left with a floppy arm. Apparently what I actually said was elbow jello, then passed out. I'm an anesthetist. Woke up a 7-year-old man who got a PP prosthesis implant for an erectile dysfunction. First thing out of his mouth in his post-surgery stupor was to request a private room and find out when he could take this baby out for a test drive. He was a happily married jokester. I got put under for my wisdom teeth at 17. When I came to, the nurse or whatever was like, "Okay, you're probably a little groggy, just sit tight for a while." And I was like, "F that, I feel amazing." And proceeded to swing my legs off the table, which sent my top half spinning right after it and falling flat on my face. People laughed. I remember the laughter. This guy I was dating, he asked me to take him to get his wisdom teeth removed. He told me that anesthesia doesn't affect him a lot, and we were supposed to go on a road trip the next day. So anyway, he gets wheeled out of the dentist by an old nurse. I'm behind the driver's seat, and I see him smacking his lips, looking up at the sky. She opens my car door, and he said, "I love her. I love her." He then proceeded to ask me to marry him several times. He tried to pull out his gauze, and I told him stop, and he said, "Man, this chick is bossy." Then, he wanted a milkshake. I would suggest a place, and he would scream, "No." Finally, we agreed on a place, and he tells me he'll give me directions. I drive for 15 minutes before I ask him what we're doing, and he said he has no idea. We're in the drive-thru and he says, "I have something for you." I swear, I thought he had bought me a ring the way he had been proposing for the last hour. It was his newly extracted teeth. They let me keep them. I want you to have them. He lived on base at the time and was yelling at the gate while they checked his ID for them to hurry up. I finally get him to his room, in bed. He's happily eating his milkshake with a spoon. His mouth was a mess of blood and milkshake. He asked me for a kiss. I gave him a peck. We're married now. Patient here. I was a teen. Apparently before I went under, I kept mumbling, "It's buried. Don't worry. Stop worrying. It's buried. It's buried. It's gone." My mom was there and said the staff were eyeballing her uncomfortably, and years later, to this day, every year she still asks me if I remember anything, and that if ever I need to talk, she'll support me no matter what. I honestly do not know what I meant. I'm an anesthesiologist. The best story was some 40-year-old woman for appendectomy said while I'm giving the propofol to induce anesthesia, "Oh, I don't remember it tasting like this before." I said, "What does it taste like?" Since propofol doesn't usually elicit a taste reaction. She almost yelled, "These nuts!" and was promptly under anesthesia thereafter. There have been other stories, but this one has had the entire staff rolling laughing for minutes after she was under. I was recently under for abdominal surgery. My partner of 17 years, who I dearly love, was the first face I remember seeing when coming out of anesthesia. I looked at him and said, "Who the F are you, and why are you staring at me?" He's still laughing. I had a guy, nefarious character, heavy drug use history, who got a bunch of ketamine, probably too much, in recovery from one of those other docs to help with severe pain after his abscess drainage. I was asked to check on him in an hour as the doc had left for the evening. Went over and saw him in that K-hole drooling on himself, but otherwise fine. So I left and came back an hour later. First thing he says to me is, "Why did you do that to me?" I asked him what he meant and he said, "You don't understand. I lived another man's life in there." I apologized and asked him, "How long do you think you were in there?" For reference, it had been something like an hour and a half or 2 hours since his trip began. "I don't know. Maybe 30 years. I was speechless. I apologized again, made sure he was safe, made sure he wasn't hurting, and made damn sure he knew it wasn't me that did it to him. TLDR, patient time traveled 30 years in a K-hole. One time, I, a male biology student in his early 20s with a stuck kidney stone, was being put under for surgery. Just as the anesthesiologist was pushing meds and telling me to count back from 100, I looked up at him in a drugged but focused gaze and said, "You're so pretty. You could be in the movies." Then blackness. The anesthesiologist was like a grizzlied, 70-year-old hunched-back-looking guy with a lopsided grimace, and more ear hair than head hair. Great doctor, though. Very last thing I remember hearing was the OR nurses cracking up laughing. It was a smallish medical community, and I knew some of the people there, so as a joke somebody snuck his headshot into my chart. I like to think it was him gunning for a second career, though. I had a colonoscopy last month and woke up rested and totally lucid. Bummer. However, when my husband had his vasectomy after our son was born, they gave him a local, it's an outpatient procedure, and some Valium and pain meds after. He was loopy. I stopped at Walgreens to fill his prescription, and he said, as he LOL'd in the passenger seat with an ice pack on his genitals, "Hey, will you get me a Coke?" I nod. "And some Doritos?" I nod again and go to leave car. And some Oreos, and some Reese's Cups, and some Twizzlers. We were 38 well behind junk food years, not stoners, and he was 6'2" and 170. Not obese or a binge eater. I said, "Are you serious?" And he grinned drunkenly and said, "Yeah." I grabbed the baby's carrier and said, "I'm taking the baby with me." He literally did finger guns. This man is a college professor who wears bow ties. I buy his snacks and painkillers and head back outside, and he's telling a guy at the Redbox video kiosk next to our car that his urologist said he had the best kind of PP for the procedure because his shaft is very straight and uniform. I took him home very quickly, gave him his snacks and let him sleep it off. He woke up hours later, covered in candy wrappers with orange Dorito fingers and asked, "What happened?" That was 13 years ago, and it's still the best.